feeling this way since we.
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Our Love Journey. Today I am by myself. Actually, I'm not by myself, but Brendan's not here because we are joined by the phenomenal Dr. Michael. We're going to be talking about a taboo topic, a topic that is not spoken a lot of in your homes, but it is probably really, really common. We are talking about bedwetting, and this podcast is in partnership with the DryNites. So let us get right into it. While you may recognize him from his earlier series on TV, you might not realize how multifaceted Dr. Michael Mol's career really is, which all started when he opted not to go for career counseling. That could well explain why today he's a medical doctor, an executive producer and presenter, a health techpreneur and founder of Hello Doctor, a global speaker, author, and most recently CEO of Truth TV. Michael makes health simple to understand and practical to apply so that you can stop fretting about your well-being and start enjoying it. Because, as he always says, life's so much better when you're healthy, and being healthy is so much easier than you think. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Michael Mol. Today is something a little different. We've got a doctor in the house, and we're going to tackle a conversation that I don't know if I can say it's taboo or uncomfortable, or is it actually a common conversation? But we are talking about bedwetting, an emphasis on bedwetting in children, right? So welcome, Dr. Michael.
Thank you so much, Mpumi. It's a very common problem. In fact, I was a bedwetter, so let's just blow the stigma out of the water there.
Really?
And that's why I'm talking about it. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Can you share a little bit about your journey with bedwetting?
Sure. So why I'm doing this is just to educate patients around what bedwetting is, what causes it, the fact that it's never your child's fault. It's not born out of the fact that when I was around 6, I used to wet my bed and my mom would wake me up, would make me wash my sheets before putting me back to bed again, just to try and get me to stop wetting your bed, Michael, because she didn't know any better. So what we're doing today, Mpumi, in terms of highlighting or putting the spotlight on bedwetting is so good for so many parents because it really is common. I'm talking 1 in 6 children in South Africa. So 1 in 6, that's a lot of kids. That means in every average school classroom, 4 or 5 kids are bedwetters. So it's hugely common. So parents need to know about this, and what we're doing is educating them and letting them know that it's not an issue and how they can deal with it.
Yeah. So during your stage, and I'm just going to go into your personal story before we get into more questions. Was it embarrassing? How did you feel? And the way your mom treated it, did it feel, was it traumatic? Are you still dealing with that? Or you felt like, hey, I'm the problem here?
No, not traumatic at all. I think I didn't know why I was bedwetting myself either. I mean, at 6, I wake up, my bed's wet. I mean, I didn't want to wet my bed. So, and now my mom making me dry my sheets. So clearly there's obviously a problem, but no, I don't have any kind of long-lasting therapy or anything like that related to that. Although that said, we do know that that is the case for a number of kids that wet their beds. But in my instance, it was short-lived. The season came, the season went, and I think by the time I was 6.5, 7, I was no longer wetting my bed. My brother, we slept on a double bunk and he was underneath me. So, I mean, I think he was facing a lot of like, is it going to leak through?
And was this your older brother or younger brother?
Younger brother, yeah.
Okay. And now did he stop bedwetting before you?
So he wasn't a bedwetter. How it works, bedwetting runs in families. Okay. So if one of the parents were bedwetters, there's around a 50% chance that their children are going to be a bedwetter. Okay. If both parents are bedwetters, 75% chance. So when it comes to whose fault is bedwetting, it's actually your fault, mom and dad.
That's hectic. So did you feel very uncomfortable considering that your younger sibling is not a bedwetter? I mean, as the older child, how does the older child feel knowing that the other sibling is not a bedwetter?
I don't remember that being an issue at all, Mpumi. So I think my bedwetting season was rather short-lived. So it probably was 5-6 months tops. I think towards the end, my folks started to realize it really isn't my fault. I'm not doing this on purpose. I'm not trying to draw attention or anything like that. They realized, hey, he, as much as we don't like this happening, so let's try and do this with as much support as possible. And that's probably why it really wasn't much of an issue at all.
Yeah. So let's get into it technically. What is considered bedwetting? Because I mean, I have toddlers. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. The 4-year-old doesn't wet their bed. They're potty trained and they properly trained, right? So she sleeps through the night and she doesn't wet her bed. My son is not yet potty trained, so he still wears his diaper, his huggies in the evening. So when do we start considering it bedwetting?
Okay, so 2 questions out of that, Mpumi. One is potty training and bedwetting are 2 very distinct things. One does not have an impact on the other. So if you feel like as a parent you messed up potty training and it took too long for your child to get potty trained, it has no impact on bedwetting, and bedwetting has no impact on potty training at all. So the 2 very distinct. All right. From a medical perspective, we only make the diagnosis, and I say that in inverted commas, of bedwetting when a child wets their bed at least twice a week and are at least 5 years old, 5 years or older. So we don't expect kids to have bladders under control in the evenings before the age of 5. That's generally when bladder maturation happens. So only after the age of 5 do we consider bedwetting an issue to be dealt with. So if your son is 4 or your daughter?
My daughter's 4, so she's fully potty trained, does not wet the bed, and then my 2-year-old is not potty trained. And I know you said it doesn't connect, but I just thought I should mention. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's fair. The interesting thing is boys are far more affected than girls when it comes to bedwetting. So twice as many boys are affected by bedwetting than girls are.
Do you know why? Why is that? It's just genetic?
We don't. The pregnant pause after that was obviously, we have no idea why. We just know those are the statistics. Yeah.
And I know we touched on it, but is it the child's fault? Why do we say it's not the child's fault?
No, it's never the child's fault. And there's 2, I'll tell you what causes bedwetting now, but you need to know as moms and dads, if you're watching this podcast, it is not your child's fault. And if it's not your child's fault, what's the logical conclusion? A child should never, ever, ever be punished for wetting their bed. Let me say that again in big, bold, black letters. Your child should never be punished for wetting the bed because it is not their fault. There are 3 main causes of bedwetting. 1, you have a bladder that's just too small and can't manage excessive volumes at night. So small bladder, number 1. Second point is your body's not producing the hormone that tells us as adults to produce less urine at night. It's a hormone called vasopressin. And basically, as you get older, that hormone gets secreted and it says to your kidneys, yo, take it easy at night. Don't produce so much urine. Kids at that age haven't matured, they're not producing that hormone, and so they produce the same amount of urine as they would during the day at night, and that's why they wet their bed. And the third reason, so in other words, small bladder, too much urine production, and the third reason is as kids get older, they become more aware of the fact that they have a full bladder. Certain kids at that age don't have that brain-bladder connection yet, and so they don't wake when their bladder is full. And those are the 3 main causes. And you'll notice that those causes have nothing to do with behavior, nothing to do with psychology, nothing to do with any mental issue. It's just a physical maturing of a child as they grow up.
I like that you touched on it's not a mental issue, because I was just reading up and an article said it can be linked to some mental health issue. When do you diagnose it as a mental health issue?
So kind of, again, a double-barreled question then, Premier. Let me deal with the first part of that question. You're talking about the causes of bedwetting being some sort of psychological issue? No. When it comes to primary bedwetting, that's when your child has never been dry before and they're wetting their bed, that's primary. And the causes of that are those 3 we mentioned. If your child has been dry for 6 months or more and then starts to wet their bed again, then we look at possibly a psychological component. Could there be a sibling that's just come into the home? Could there be a parental divorce or fighting or, all of those kinds of things? And there could be other conditions, diseases, diabetes, sickle cell anemia, all those smaller things. That's usually associated with secondary bedwetting. Child was dry and now wets their bed again. Okay, so that's the first part of your question. The second part, and I think this is what we really need to dig into in this podcast, is what is the impact of bedwetting on a child? And when it comes to impact, significant in terms of not mental health issue, but self-esteem issue. So children who wet their beds have a lower self-esteem and see themselves as less than compared to kids who don't wet their beds at night. Number one, so self-esteem issue, confidence issue. Number two, children who wet their bed are prone to depression later on in life. Now that is a mental health issue. So that's something that we as parents need to really deal with. And it comes down to my child. If my child wets their bed and, like Michael, it didn't really bother him, wasn't much of an issue, then we can treat the child conservatively. If we can see it's really impacting my kid socially, they're withdrawing, they don't want to go on sleep outs anymore, they don't want friends to come and visit in case they wake up in a wet bed, that really starts to affect them psychologically, then as parents, we jump in and we deal with the issue as effectively and as quickly and swiftly as possible.
So what's the best way? I'm still digging into that. What's the best way to, because I think when it comes to child psychology and trying to get help for a child, you don't want them to ever feel like, oh, I have a problem. So what's the best way to start intervening when you can see that it's starting to affect your child's self-esteem, especially like a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, 6-year-old? How do you best intervene without making the child feel like, hey, it's your fault, so now we're getting you help, or hey, it's your fault, now you can't have friends over?
So I think the biggest issue there with parents is don't make it an issue for you as a parent, because so often parents feel like, oh my word, I mean, you came out right at the outset to say, my child doesn't wet their bed at night. You know?
It's my pride, yeah, and it's not right.
And it's that stigma of my child does wet their bed at night, you know, and I don't want to tell other parents that because I'm ashamed. So if you as a parent take issue with bedwetting, your child is going to take issue with bedwetting. You can't do that. In fact, lovely story of Thomas Edison. You might remember the guy that invented the light bulb and a whole bunch of other things, a great inventor. I don't know if he was a bedwetter or not, but he came home from school one day at the age of 6 with a letter for his mom that his teachers had given to him. And they'd said, only your mom must read this. So he gives it to his mom. He says, what does it say? She reads it and she says, Thomas is a genius. He's too clever for our school. Would you please teach him? And so she taught him for the rest of his school career. Many years later, after his mom had passed away, he was going through his stuff and he came across that same letter. And here's what the letter actually said. Your son is mentally deficient. We don't want him in the school. You teach him. And he writes that day, Thomas Edison, in his journal, and he says, Thomas Edison became one of the greatest inventors of the 20th century because his mother believed in him. And it seems like a platitude statement, but the point is, here's an amazing man who, just because his mother thought he was brilliant, became brilliant. You know, and if we as parents look at this issue of bedwetting and it becomes an issue for us, our children take on that issue and they make it their own. So first thing, parents, don't make bedwetting an issue. All right. If you see that it is affecting your child's confidence and self-esteem, there's a lot you can do. And I think start conservatively. So don't take your child to a child psychologist. Don't take him to the specialist off the bat, particularly if he's under 5. In fact, I would even wait until your child is around 7 before you really get, medical intervention. My approach would be conservative at first. So the things that are logical. So avoid excessive fluid at night. During the day, give your child as much fluid as possible. You want their bladders to get big and strong. But at night, around 2 hours before bedtime, no fluids. Yeah. All right. And again, don't give them caffeinated drinks. Most parents don't, because why would I give my kid coffee? But certain teas have got caffeine in, certain sodas have got caffeine in. Avoid caffeinated drinks. Hot chocolate's got caffeine in. You can also avoid high protein and high salt at dinner time because that just causes a little more retention of urine. So they maintaining more urine in their blood or producing more urine. And then obviously just before your kids go to bed, empty their bladder. Just the basic stuff. And if you do that, that's a conservative approach to bedwetting. And if you like, there's some studies that have shown this to be beneficial. Have rewards charts, but reward your kids for having a dry night. So for example, hey, Monday was a dry night. Well done, star for you. If Tuesday is not a dry night, we don't criticize you, don't put up a black mark. We just celebrate the dry days and we don't talk about the wet days, as it were, okay? Or we don't make an issue of the wet days. So there's that positive reinforcement of dry nights. The controversy comes into the fact that it has very little to do with the child, whether they are wetting their bed or not. So what are you rewarding? Their body's ability to mature and grow or not. So it really, I think the benefit there is your child feels like they part of this season of growing up and maturing. And I think that's probably the best thing to say to your kids is, hey guys, for most children, this is going to come to pass. I think 1% of teenagers wet their beds at night. Under the age of 5, 50% of kids are wetting their bed. By the time they get to 5, it's around 20%. By the time they get to around 10, it's down to 5%. So you kind of get that approach. Yeah.
So now you spoke about rewarding, right? The rewarding system, and you said perhaps on DryNites, rewarded. Do you think that has some sort of psychological effect? Because you've given us the causes of dry wetting. Does it have some sort of psychological effect, or even hormonal effect on stopping or getting better at the bedwetting, or is it just simply got to do with their self-esteem and encouraging them that, hey, look, you're part of, it's part of growth. You're getting it.
It's positive reinforcement. It's acknowledging that this is an issue, or that it's happening. Not that it's a big issue, but we know that it's happening, and say, hey man, you had a dry night tonight. That is fantastic. It's got nothing to do with speeding up the process of bedwetting. In fact, of getting through the season of bedwetting. The big thing when it comes to bedwetting and your kids is you want to support your children through the season of bedwetting. It doesn't need to be cured. It doesn't need to be taken away or pushed aside. Okay. They're wetting their bed. Support your kids through the season with as little impact on their self-esteem as possible. And so things like pull-ups, DryNites have got these great pull-ups. Yeah. And the reason it's so effective is your kids get to go to sleep at night. They use these pull-ups. They're not nappies. They're pull-ups. They're quiet. They're discreet. You can use them for sleepovers. They're super absorbent. Your child knows that if I go to bed tonight and I have an incident, no one's going to know. The bed's not going to be wet. I'll be the only one. I can get rid of the evidence in the morning before anyone even wakes up. And there's just that sense of confidence and calmness, and you're taking away the anxiety that's associated with falling asleep, not knowing if I'm going to wake up in a wet bed or not. So just another way of really adding to your child's the self-esteem, but also just reducing anxiety as they go through the season of bedwetting. Again, that doesn't stop bedwetting. It doesn't cure it. It just through the season. And by the way, the same thing for medication. So we started off with the conservative approach, but now let's say you have a child who's really affected by the fact that they're wetting their bed, and you feel you need to do more as a parent. Then you get proactive, and there are really two things you can do proactively. One is you can use bedwetting alarms. All right, they're expensive. They take a lot of motivation, because when those alarms go off, everybody wakes up, not just
their mind. Yeah.
And the big idea is you want your kids to kind of be aware of when their bladder is full. So that's what that's doing. That's teaching your kids to be aware that their bladder is full, and to hopefully speed up the maturation of that brain-bladder connection.
But that comes at a later stage, right?
It does, and it's only effective. Those bedwetting alarms are only effective in around 2/3 of people, and it takes time before that has an effect. Sort of 2 to 3 months of using it before you start to see more dry nights, for example. So that's one proactive approach. The other approach is medication. So there's a drug in the market called DDABP, or desmopressin, which is basically the equivalent of the hormone vasopressin that your child should be producing any time now, but is not. So you give that medication to your child, and it works immediately. Like, it's a hormone that tells the kidneys to stop producing a lot of urine at night. And also effective in 2/3 of kids. Not everybody, benefits from that. But the beauty of that is that it works immediately. Yeah. But the fact that it works immediately doesn't mean you've cured bedwetting. As soon as you stop taking the medication, your child's not getting that hormone, and they go back to producing excessive amounts of urine at night. So you see what I'm trying to get to. Bedwetting is a season. Support your child through the season. It doesn't need to be cured or treated, or you just
have support. Yeah. Can it be too early to introduce the pull-ups, the DryNites?
It depends on your child. If your child at the age of 4, your daughter's 4, and you've already said she doesn't wet her bed. If a child is at the age of 4 and they're getting a little bit concerned that they're wetting their bed at night, by all means, use DryNites. My sense is, if anyone comes to me and says, my child is wetting their bed at night, and they're under 5, I'm like, children should be wetting their bed at night. Many do, most do. It's only after the age of 5. Yeah, absolutely. After the age of 5, we start expecting that bladder to kind of mature. If they're still then wetting their bed, then go for it. DryNites, reduce fluid intake, all the sort of stuff we talked about.
You spoke about medication. When do you seek medical help?
So difference between medication and medical help, your GP will prescribe medication for bedwetting. That's fairly simple. It's a very, very safe product. Looking or seeking medical help, for me, that would border on my child has either been dry and is now wetting the bed again. So there's potentially a medical issue, or my child is now 6, 7, 8 and still wetting their bed. That requires some medical intervention. Or thirdly, my child is having daytime accidents. We have this term in medicine called, the term is NME, non-monosymptomatic enuresis, which means you've either got monosymptomatic enuresis, which means I'm confusing you guys.
I wouldn't even know if you mixed it up.
The point is, if there are any daytime incidents or other related urinary tract issues, that becomes a complicated case, requires medical intervention. The monosymptomatic, in other words, only wetting their bed at night, no other issues, that's a straightforward bedwetting. Support your child through the season. You don't need to see a specialist for those instances.
I actually like that you use the word season, because I think, and also how you mentioned that we shouldn't personalize it as parents. And I think just as a parent, for example, my son has eczema, right? And his eczema, it doesn't bother him. So he doesn't get itchy. He doesn't have like outbursts or anything. It's just his skin gets really, really dry. And I used to take it so personally, and I would want to do everything in my power to fix it. And he wasn't bothered by it. And I feel like as soon as I let it go, everything's fine. So I think the same thing with bedwetting. As parents, we just need to relax a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, understand that it's common. 1 in 6 kids. So look at the people that you carpool with, or spend time in the parking lot with. If you start talking to those moms and you get them to open up, 1 out of 6 moms will tell you, that's right, my kid wets their bed, But we don't talk about that because there is that whole stigma associated with bedwetting.
The changing, I want to go to something lighter, the changing of your own bedding when you were wetting your bed. Why do you think parents should encourage that, especially in older kids? Because I know a lot of parents would actually do that, you made the mess, clean up your mess. Do you think parents should actually encourage it, or they should just help their parents, and help their children? Should we make it this little secret, or hey, let's just change your bedding, it's another night?
Washing your own linen is punishment. Kids wouldn't normally do that. I mean, if your child, didn't have a wet bed, do you get him up the next morning and say, hey, you must go wash your linen? No, you don't. So the fact that you wash your linen because you wet it is punishment. And if you're punishing a child for something that they have no control over, that does more damage to their psyche than if you just washed those sheets for them and said, hey, it's between you and mom, don't worry about that. So as soon as you start punishing a child in any which way, you're doing damage. In fact, we know that 50% of bedwetters are being physically punished for wetting their bed. 50%, 1 in 2 kids. And the irony is, when you punish your child for wetting their bed, it extends the season of bedwetting and doubles the risk of depression later on in life. So you as a parent are just making things worse by punishing a child, whether it's giving them a hiding, whether it's making them wash their own sheets, or whether, and this is a father came to me and told me the story after a talk I gave at an event. He said, my dad used to take the mattress, put it in the back of the bucky, and drive me to school in it so people could see the wet spot to try and get me to stop wetting my bed. I mean, that's just shaming your own son. And that's punishment extraordinary. You just don't do that. In fact, a chaplain told me about a gang member in Pollsmoor who told him the story of, as a kid, he would wet his bed and his parents would make him, in the middle of winter, stand in the corner of their room in his little skivvy shorts up all night in their room behind the door if he wet his bed, when he wet his bed, to try and get him to stop. So that was horrendous punishment. I'm not saying that's why it made him a murderous gangster, but I am saying that was enough of an issue to bring up with a chaplain in prison. Kids don't forget that kind of thing. So no, never, ever get your kids to wash their linen, do any kind of punishment for something that was not their fault. It was your fault, parents. Remember, it's genetic. Punish yourself.
You started this whole thing. So now, what made you want to invest so much of your time into bedwetting? Besides, because you said when you were growing up, it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big issue. So normally, I think people want to solve situations or get into cases or get into industries because they were hurt or burdened by something, but you said it wasn't traumatic. So what made you invest so much of your time into bedwetting?
Pumi, just the idea that kids are being punished for something that is not their fault. That's just an injustice of note. Injustice is bad enough as it is. When it's an injustice to a child, I just can't deal with that. So, and as a bedwetter, I mean, that was just a nice little spark to sort of say, hey, I get that. The fact that I'm a medical doctor means I understand the stuff. I understand the physiology behind that. I have credibility as a medical doctor. So all of a sudden, a whole bunch of those elements came together, and it just made sense to say, hey, man, this is a little bit of my time. I get to tell parents who are interested, who are going through the season, who are worried and panicked and thinking, there's something wrong with my child. They say, there's nothing wrong with your child. These are the facts. You now know more about bedwetting than actually most GPs do, because they don't know all of the stuff necessarily. The great ones do. So I just get to basically limit the amount of punishment that gets dealt out to kids. And that's why I do what I do.
I love that. So what is World Bedwetting Day, and when do we celebrate it or acknowledge the day, and what is it all about?
It changes every year. It's generally in May. I think this year it's the 30th of May, World Bedwetting Day. It was launched in 2015 by the International Children's Continence Society. There is a society about children being continent. And the aim really is to raise awareness around bedwetting and its impact on children and on families. And that's all it is. So it's really just a case of, hey, I didn't know this. Someone's listened to your podcast and goes, hey, that's right. I had no idea. I mean, we've been battling with bedwetting for a while. This makes so much sense. Thank you so much for this information. And that's really what bedwetting is all about. And I think two big things: minimizing punishment, and of course, minimizing the impact, the psychological impact that bedwetting has on kids. If we can reduce that effect, because that effect is a long-lasting potential. The risk of major depression growing up, that just shouldn't be the case. Already with COVID, there's so much mental health issues coming to the fore. Bedwetting just adds to that. So whatever you do, don't make it an issue.
Yeah, and I think this conversation was really great and highlighted a lot for me, because I think I know quite a few people growing up. I had family members who were bedwetters. I know someone who was a bedwetter until they were an adult. And just listening to their story, it all sounds like it's just a burden of shame. It's just filled with so much shame and almost unwanted, the kids who feel like they are unwanted. So I think it's so good to highlight that, hey, it's not the kids' fault. And hey, chances are the parents have contributed because it is genetic. And also it's just a season. That is something you mentioned quite a lot, that I think it's important, that it's just a season. There's no shame. Children should not be punished, but rather should be really, really supported through the season.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said. Well summed up.
And my last question is, I love talking about purpose, and I highly believe that this feels like a purpose direction or purpose work for you. What gives you purpose in your line of work?
So my line of work is very varied, Pumi. I mean, there's media, there's streaming, there's medicine. I think what drives me is just the privilege of having a platform and what I get to say from that platform. So if people are going to give me their time and they're going to listen to what I have to say, they're going to give up some valuable minutes they could have spent with their family or their friends or work to listen to me, I really want to make it worth their while. So whatever I get to share on whatever platform I find myself, that is very important to me, whether it's medicine, whether it's media, whether it's my faith, that's all really, really key. So what drives me is this privilege to sounds horrible to say. My kids are like, you're not an influencer, Dad. No, probably not. But in a small way to have an influence on people through what I say and use the platforms that I've been given, that's what drives me.
And that is it for today. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael. You've been really, really, really amazing. I think you've shared some knowledge that a lot of people could use. And the best part is you've simplified everything. Nothing sounds overly medical and big terms, but you've really simplified it. And thank you so, so much. I hope we can chat to you another day and have you on the Our Love Journey podcast again. So if you have
lots to talk about. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, life's just so much better when you're healthy, and being healthy is so much easier than you think. And that's really been a mantra for me. So yeah, we'll chat to you again soon. Follow me on social. Lots to give, lots of information to share, and yeah, all about living your best life.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining this conversation. I really hope it has been helpful. Please make sure that you share it with some family members. I know everybody knows a parent who's probably felt ashamed or felt outside or left out because of bedwetting. So let's not make it taboo. Let's take away the shame, and let's actually talk about it. As we always say on our love journey, it's all about asking the right questions, starting the conversation, because that releases shame, and that really, really helps us. And at the end of the day, we want to raise healthy children. We want to raise well children. We want to raise children who are confident and secure. So thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for DryNites for sponsoring and partnering with us on this conversation. I am Pumila Dwaba, and thank you for tuning in to Our Love Journey.